guys, welcome back as we continue our study in the Gospels. For the last 28 days, we have, plowed through the Gospel of Matthew, portraying Jesus Christ as King. Now we're going to jump to another Gospel, Mark. Mark, to me, has one word, and it's an incredible picture of Jesus being, you ready for this? A servant. So in Matthew, you have King. In Mark, you have servant. Now, anybody want to guess? Who wrote the book of Mark?
Would it be Mark?
It could be. How about a full name?
John Mark?
It is John Mark. Kevin, it was almost like you went into defeat for a second, and then you pulled back out. Way to go, Kevin. John Mark. So if we can, let's give you a little bit of picture and backdrop of John Mark. Obviously, the title of the book is Mark. All right, so let's go to Acts 12, verse 12, if you can, Kevin. Acts 12, verse 12. It's kind of a fun way. We get to start brand new. Now think about this. This is who we're talking about. This is your author. When he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John Mark, where many had been assembled and were praying. So naturally, I just want to show something here. Mark is going to have a blend and a perspective of a lot of prayer. Whenever you have a praying mom, it tends to carry over into your kids. So here you have the author. He's known as mother, who's known as praying. Okay. Now go to Acts 12, verse 25. And Barnabas and Saul returned to Jerusalem after they had completed their relief mission, which they took John Mark on. So think about this. On the very first missionary journey, guess who gets to go with Barnabas and Saul? John Mark, the author of Mark. Now, at the same time, does anybody know who he's related to?
Barnabas.
Yeah, he's Barnabas. He's Barnabas' cousin. Can you go to Colossians 4, verse 10? Now look, Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, greets you, as does Mark, Barnabas' cousin. So just it's a rich heritage, rich family of not just monetary, I'm just talking about spiritual legacy. Now, a couple other things. The problem is John Mark, he's also known as the complete opposite side. John Mark had some issues with some family as well. Acts 13, verse 13, okay? He couldn't finish the race. There's no other way of putting it. Paul and his companions set sail from Paphos and came to Perga and Pamphylia. John, however, he left them and went back to Jerusalem. So in the middle of this journey, John Mark, who again is the writer of Mark, he did not stay the course. Now, because of this split right here, John Mark created a split and a rift between Paul and his cousin Barnabas. The family member, Barnabas, obviously wants to keep running, right, with Mark. Now watch, Kevin, if you go to Acts 15, verse 38. Acts 15, verse 38. Paul did not think it appropriate to take along this man who had deserted them in Pamphylia. He didn't want a guy that bailed on him and had not gone on with them to the work. Verse 39. There was such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. And Barnabas, remember, his cousin, took Mark with him, sailed off to Cyprus. Verse 40. It says, then Paul chose Silas, departed after being commended to the grace of the Lord by the brothers. So John Mark grew up in a spiritual family, cousin to Barnabas, went on the first missionary journey with Paul and Barnabas, and then in the middle of this, he bailed on him. And because he bailed on him, Paul said, I don't want anything to do with them. So then they split. Paul takes Silas, Barnabas takes John Mark. Now, here's what's interesting. Even though he bailed on Paul, I want to give you a little bit of a perspective even in down the road. Go to Philemon, Kevin, verse 24. Only one chapter, so Philemon 24. Now watch this. Look, okay, who's identified as a co-worker. Mark, Aristarchus, Demas, and Luke. So Mark is listed in here as a fellow worker, as a co-worker. And then the crazy thing is, go to 2 Timothy 4:11. Even after all of this, he is still found useful. 2 Timothy 4:11, only Luke is with me. Bring Mark with you, for he is useful to me in the ministry. I thought he bailed on you. But yet, even though he bailed, even if he had to go home, I feel like I should say this, to be like a mama's boy, to go back to his mom, the crazy thing is he's still a fellow worker and he's still useful in the ministry. Paul just didn't happen to agree at that time. And so one other thing, Peter really actually connected with him. Peter and John Mark were buddies. In fact, 1 Peter 5:13, this is the last backdrop of our author, but I think this is important. Like all of these experiences come into play when he puts down the Word of God. Now look what Peter writes. The church in Babylon, also chosen, sends you greetings, as does Mark, my son. Now obviously, Peter is not Mark's father, but he's talking about this close relationship, this discipleship relationship, this running fellow workers relationship. And so obviously John Mark, he's been with a who's who. Isn't this incredible? You think about this, Paul, Barnabas, Peter. This is crazy. So he's obviously an incredible man of God. Now, most people would say that the date was sometime written in the 50s, okay, the 8050s, okay, sometime in that time. He probably wrote this in Rome because his target audience was Roman believers who were Gentiles. So here he is in Rome writing to Roman believers. After you watch that movie, The Apostle Paul, I have a different perspective of Roman believers now. And then, he's speaking to Gentiles. Now, all of this to say, you ready for this? And I think this is important. If it's in the 50s, 8050s, 8060s, you're talking how much farther down the road after the resurrection? So probably 2 to 3 decades, at least 2 to 3 decades after the resurrection. Again, when this is written, I want to give this into perspective in relation to the other Gospels. Okay? Now, we have a theme. We've already talked about this theme. All throughout the Gospel of Mark, you're going to see this layer of Jesus being a servant. Jesus being the ultimate servant. Jesus being the suffering servant. So I'm just going to write the theme verse, and I have to tell you, it is as close as I can get to a life verse from my own life. And I think, honestly, it's because of my father. My dad, Larry, has modeled this really well. So because I have a model in my dad in this, I actually understand Mark 10:45 more. And Mark 10:45 says, even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give His life a ransom for many. He doesn't have this expectation, you do the work for me. No, Jesus is going to do it for you. And ultimately, that serving is He's going to give up His life, a ransom for many. Now, in this process of being a servant, one of the things I want to show is that Jesus is human. Okay? Jesus is He's going to show you emotions. So Kevin, if you can you go to Mark 1:41, if you would. He's going to show us emotions. Mark 1:41. First of all, it just says this, moved with compassion. As a suffering servant, the way you're going to serve is you're going to have emotions for people. And the reason that He's moving for people is because you have compassion on these people. So as a suffering servant, I want you to think His emotions allow Him to connect with people. One other component of the emotions. Can you go to Mark 3, verse 5? Mark 3, verse 5. Again, all we're just trying to show you, as one commentator said, is just trying to paint a picture of what this servant is really like. Now look at this. Look, this is really interesting. What does he say? After looking around at them, and how does he look at them? With anger and sorrow at the hardness of their hearts, he told the man, stretch out your hand. So he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. So because of anger and sorrow towards the hardness of the hearts, look what he did. He actually healed a man. But his emotions allowed him to serve the people. Let me just tell you this. If you want to model Jesus being a servant in your own life, you actually have to care about the people in front of you. You have to have emotions in wanting to look at people. So Jesus shows that. Now, Jesus also shows that He has limitations. So Kevin, if you would you go to Mark 4, verse 38? Jesus has emotions and He has limitations. Now watch this. Mark 4, verse 38. But he was in the stern, sleeping on the cushion. What was his limitations? He was tired. Jesus was legitimately tired, so that limited him. He was tired. He laid down and he was out. So to me, we need to connect on all these levels. Let's just go to one more if you can. Go to Mark 11, verse 12. In Mark 11, verse 12, it says the next day, when they came out from Bethany, what was happening? He was hungry. So not only was Jesus tired, Kevin, as he yawns, but Jesus was also hungry. He had limitations. He had emotions, he had limitations. And then last one is that he flat out, as a human, he has a human side to him. I know that sounds kind of funny, but Kevin, can you go to Mark 7, verse 33? Mark 7, verse 33. And here's what you're going to see. So he took him away from the crowd privately. After putting his fingers in the man's ears and spitting, he touched his tongue. Did you see this? Is this not awesome? He put his fingers in the man's ears and spitting, and then what does he do? I'm pretty sure he doesn't wash his hands. And then he touched his tongue. This is reality of Jesus and his human side to him. One more, Mark 8, verse 12, and then we're going to jump into Mark 1. But Mark 8, verse 12, again, more of the human side of Jesus as a suffering servant, as a servant, but sighing deeply in his spirit. Why does this generation demand a sign? I assure you, no sign will be given to this generation. I just love that phrase, sighing deeply in his spirit. Kevin? Rich, I think this is a fair question. Have you ever heard Kevin do that deep sigh?
I have. I've also heard Drew Gibbs do it.
Ah, yes.
Drew Gibbs has a really good sigh. He's a good sigher.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you mean? All right, this is really good. All right, so Jesus as a human, okay, we're really ultimately saying he becomes the servant. He shows us his emotions, his limitations, and just the human side of who he is. So now what you're going to see in Mark 1 through the first 8 verses, okay, is you're going to see what we would announce as the herald, the Messiah's herald. You guys remember when we talked in Matthew, we talked about John the Baptist. We're not going to talk a lot about John the Baptist here, but he begins to prepare the way. So much so that in verse 9 of Mark 1, what happens? We begin to talk through about Jesus' baptism. Now what you're going to see though in Mark is that some of these stories are super short. Now think about in verse 12. This is the temptation of Jesus in 2 verses. Well, we read a whole lot more of that, right? Because Jesus combated the temptations of Satan with the word in 3 different instances. Man, this just says he went into the wilderness and he was there for 40 days. Moving on. That's just a different perspective. Now watch, in verse 14 through 15, all right, Rich, you ready for this? We closed it in Matthew 28. We talked about it in Matthew 4. Where did Jesus start his ministry?
That would be in Galilee.
That would be in Galilee. That's exactly what happens in verse 14. As John was arrested, Jesus went to Galilee. My hope and my prayer is, honestly for myself, these guys right here, and those that are part of Revive School, as we continue to do repetition, all of this is just going to start to fill in the blanks. We're just going to start seeing more and more about who Christ is. When I think about Jesus, you know what I think about? I think about the 12 tribes. You know what I think about the 12 tribes? Zebulun and Naphtali. That's where Jesus did ministry. That was prophesied in the Old Testament. So, which was outside of Galilee. All this is just, it all ties together. All right, so in 16 all the way through 20, we're going to talk about how Jesus begins to rally his initial disciples. He finds fishermen. And then he goes on a little bit farther. He finds James and John, and they're in their boat. And so all of a sudden, he's really gathering the crew to get ready to what? Do ministry in Capernaum. So what you're going to see in verse 21 is the beginning of Jesus' ministry. It says in verse 21, then they went into Capernaum. And right away, he entered the synagogue on the Sabbath and began to teach. One of the things that is a common thread throughout Mark is that Jesus always went to the synagogue. He always went to the synagogue and he always went to teach. The teaching ministry in the Gospel of Mark is unbelievable. In fact, you don't have to go there, Kevin, but Mark 2:13, Mark 4:1 through 12, Mark 6, Mark 10, Mark 11, Mark 12, Mark 14, all of those examples of teaching ministry of Jesus. I list them because I want you to feel like as you go through this, you're like, wow, this is a lot. And it starts in a prosperous fishing village on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. It's an important city. In fact, it's more of an important city than Nazareth. It's located on a major road, and it would become an essential component to Jesus' headquarters. I love that you can actually list Capernaum as Jesus' headquarters. If you want to go to verse 22, this would be great. It says this, they were astonished at his teaching because unlike the scribes, he was teaching them as one having authority. What do you think that means? What's the difference there, Drew? I don't know, when you see this, he's different than the scribes. He's teaching with authority. How would you say they're different?
I think it's, you believe that they know what they're talking about. You know, when they're teaching, they have an air about them, and also the way they teach, you can tell that they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, what they're talking about, and I would even say what we have learned just a little bit in traveling to Israel on a consistent basis is that the Jewish religion, they have a tendency to uphold oral tradition. And so what they're going to do is they're going to recite, I think this is a fair statement, other rabbis' perspectives. They're going to recite other traditions where Jesus is the truth and he's quoting, he's referencing himself. He speaks with authority where these guys are just quoting other guys. So there's like this fresh, new, like, wow, where's he getting that authority from? That's not how we normally talk. In fact, I love what one commentator said. He's speaking with directness, forcefulness, and he's personal. Jesus is doing all of this. In fact, they're astonished. It says they were astonished, they were astounded at his teaching. In fact, in Mark, 42%, I think this is a cool stat, 42%, according to Nelson's, his verses are specifically in reference to teaching. There's a teaching time, 42%. So that's a lot of class in the Gospel of Mark. That is a lot of classroom time. Don't tell Tony Hicks that. He'll be like, the whole thing's on teaching? Yeah, it's a lot. But there's a different perspective in all of this. Now in verse 23, you ready for this? It says this, just then, where are they at right now?
They're in the synagogue.
They're in a synagogue. Just then, a man with an unclean spirit was in their synagogue. And he cried out. So church service is happening. And I don't know, lack of a better phrase, a crazy man starts yelling out. I think we've had some of that before. That's happened before. So they were astonished at his authority. And just then, as they're in a synagogue, a man with an unclean spirit was in their synagogue. And this is what he cries out in verse 24. What do you have to do with us, Jesus, Nazarene? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God. Man, this is so cool to me. The demons even identify. The demon that's inside this unclean man, right? This unclean spirit inside of a man. The demons even recognize Jesus the Nazarene as a human, and they recognize him as the Holy One of God. So they recognize the deity and the humanity all in one verse. And they're saying, as John MacArthur said, why are you interfering with us? These are two different kingdoms. Why are you bringing who you are in our life right now? So look at this. While we're in the percentage of, talking about percentages, okay? 42% references Mark's teachings. Now 20%, according to Nelson's, references 35 miracles recorded in reference to demons. So there's a good quarter of a percentage in the Gospel of Mark that you're going to hear constant interaction with the demonic. Which says to me, it's simple, that Christ is always, in order to experience the demonic, you got to be with people. I love when people are like, oh, demons don't exist today. Oh, what are you talking about? That was for back then. They apparently have never done ministry. If you do ministry and you're out on the streets, you do ministry in your neighborhood, you do ministry literally just in life every day. It doesn't matter if you're in Wisconsin, in Indiana, or Texas, or even in Israel. I promise you, as you continue to declare the gospel, you will experience the demonic. So the only thing I can conclude is that if you don't think the demonic exists, I question, are you doing the work of Christ? You're like, whoa, that's pretty harsh. Yeah, but think about this. If Satan is real, which I would say most people listening would say, yes, he is, then so are demons. They're all fallen angels. If Satan is real, so are the fallen angels, which are called demons. And if they're called demons, guess what? We need to be casting them out of people. And Jesus spent at least a quarter of his time constantly casting out demons. Why? Because he's here to serve mankind. He's not to serve himself. It means you got to get messy. It means you got to be willing to get in the trenches, literally, and engage the community, even when you don't really want to. Now think about this concept, okay? He's in a synagogue. I think it's helpful to understand the process of a synagogue. We're going to get to the demonic even in a little bit more. But think about this. When you come into a synagogue, here's what you can expect, okay? Nelson's kind of breaks it down for me. You're going to always expect elders, okay? So in a synagogue, you're going to expect elders, okay? Elders are ones who regulate the policies of the synagogue. Now, at the same time of elders in the synagogue, you should expect a ruler. A ruler is one who's appointed by the elders, and they attend to the matters concerning the building, the planning of services. Jairus, remember how the healing of the daughter? He would be a ruler, okay, within a synagogue. Now, at the same time, you have elders and ruler. You also have ministers, okay? A minister is the one who's in charge of the sacred scrolls. He's attendant to the lamps. He also keeps the building clean. When he's not doing that, the minister is to teach the children how to read, and he's also to determine how many lashes if there's a situation in the community. So the minister does all kinds of things. Elders, ruler, minister. Now, Remember this one? A delegate. A delegate of the congregation is not a permanent office. Okay, a ruler would then, remember, a ruler would choose a capable person, you're going to hear this story here, who would then choose a person, he would choose a capable person to read a scripture lesson, certain prayers, and preach. Jesus did this in the Nazareth synagogue when he read through Luke 4. Remember when he quoted Isaiah 61. Jesus served as a delegate that was appointed by the ruler. So when Jesus comes into a situation, he should be looking for these people in a synagogue. Now, at the same time, you're going to have an interpreter. An interpreter was one that when the scriptures were written in Hebrew, they would then, since most Jews spoke in Aramaic, they would actually interpret the readings. This is the process of a synagogue. At the same time, one more here, okay, guys? They have, and I think I'm going to say this right, almones or almoners. They are 2 or 3 people, okay, that would receive and collect alimonies, maybe? Alimonies is how maybe you sound it. They would collect the money for the poor in their community. So you have elders, rulers, minister, deacon, interpreter, alimonies. And all of this, okay, is at least, this happens when you have at least 10 men to start a synagogue. So when Jesus was, this is why I'm saying this, if Jesus spent 42% of this writing communicating his teaching, he's constantly interacting with people in the synagogues. So if he's interacting with people in the synagogues, we got to understand he's going to find an elders there, he's going to find a ruler, a minister, a delegate, an interpreter, and then apparently alimonies. However you pronounce it. So this is the process. Now, catch this, okay? Remember, Paul, what would Paul do? Paul always was going in synagogues. He went into Damascus, found a synagogue. Salamis, he went into a synagogue. Antioch and Pisidia, sat in a synagogue. Iconium, went into a synagogue. Thessalonica, 3 times in a row, went into Thessalonica. Athens, Ephesus. And I just want us to understand that when we hear about these teachings and these interactions with the religious, it's always in a synagogue. And so now watch this. They come into a synagogue. You ready for this? The service always began with the Shema. What's the Shema? Deuteronomy 6:4. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. And then you pass this down to your kids. That's how they always started a service. Then at the same time, a speaker would lead a time of prayer, okay? And they would, ready for this, face Jerusalem with their hands extended in a synagogue facing Jerusalem. And then a chosen speaker would stand and read the law, and then what would he do? Translate it, have somebody translate it into Aramaic. Then a passage would be read from the prophets. So the law would be read, the prophets would be read, and then, what do you know? You have the commentary and the sermon that takes place. That would be the delegate. The person, the Jesus, that comes in and then speaks and teaches. When they're done, they would sit down, and then a priest would proclaim a benediction, and then everybody would say, Amen. I'm saying this because this becomes an underlining audience all throughout the Gospel of Mark. And so I just feel like when we begin to communicate this, he's speaking in a synagogue. A man with an unclean spirit starts crying out, and there's this question, this battle of the demonic. And then in verse 25 of Mark 1, Jesus just simply rebuked him and he said, be quiet. Or in other words, be muzzled and come out of him. He's not rebuking the man, he's rebuking the demonic. And the unclean, I would just love to have seen this. The unclean spirit convulsed him. This man just went into shaking, probably foaming at the mouth, shouted with a loud voice, and came out of him. Can I just tell you, when you deal with the demonic, it could get messy. Oh, that's not of the Lord. Look what happened in Mark 1:26. Jesus rebuked him, and then instantly stuff started to happen. In verse 27, and then they were all amazed. The people that were where? In the synagogue, right? So they began to argue with one another, saying, What is this? A new teaching? A teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. Jesus spoke with authority. This teaching was with authority. And then in verse 28, because of that, news about Jesus spread throughout the entire vicinity of Galilee. Word spread based on what story?
On that calling out the demons out of the
That's
unclean
it.
spirit.
That's it. Word spread because Jesus cast out the demonic in a synagogue. That doesn't happen. What are you talking about? That's not how we do church service. That's not, excuse me, that's not part of our order. I'm sorry, you went a little long over there, Jesus. This man is convulsing. Get him out. You see, when you walk with authority and power, it will look different. And the spirit of religion will push back. But at the same time, there will be people who are hungry to experience more of this truth. And then it just begins, this interactions with people all throughout Galilee, all throughout Capernaum. It says in verse 29, as soon as they left the synagogue, they went into Simon and Andrew's house with James and John. So the four, the sons of thunder, Simon and Andrew. And then what did they do in verse 30? It says Simon's mother-in-law was lying in bed with a fever. So we know that Peter was married. Did you hear that? How do we know? Because Peter had a mother-in-law. She was sick. She had a fever. And they told Jesus about her at once. We do know that in 1 Corinthians 9:5, you don't have to go there. It just talks about Peter's marriage. It talks about him being married, 1 Corinthians 9:5. So in verse 31, he hears, you ready for this? That the mother-in-law is sick. What does he do? Doesn't say take 2 pills and call me in the morning, which sometimes that works. But it says he went to her. Why? Because Jesus is here to serve. He took her by the hand. He had compassion. And it says he raised her up. He touched her. And then the fever left her and she began to serve them. It doesn't say this, but I'm just going to say instantly this woman was healed. And all I can just say is that he served her, and as a result, more was beginning to take place. Watch. Verse 32. When evening came, we're going to start seeing Jesus' heart again. After the sun had set, they began bringing to him all those who were sick and those who were demon-possessed. I mean, you guys, so all the things that we've seen right now, we've seen that he healed a mother-in-law, and we saw that he cast out a demon, correct? And as a result, look who starts coming. All those who were sick and all those who were demon-possessed. Word spread fast. And in fact, look at verse 33. So fast that the whole town was assembled at the door. Hey, who's at the door? Jesus? Oh, just the whole town. All those who were demon-possessed and all those who were sick. I just think this is cool, you guys. If you keep going, Kevin, to verse 34, and it says, and he healed many who were sick with various diseases, and he drove out many demons. But he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. This is an exact picture of what we're after. Healing the sick, casting out the demons. That's the servant that we're talking about. He's engaging his own community. Capernaum, Galilee, they're seeing the true servant. Now look at Minnie's incredible painting. Remember, 1 painting per book of the Bible. This is the one word, which is servant. There's so many different characteristics, components of this, but I want to emphasize one right now. Think about the hand. The hand is the one that brings about, yes, the power of Christ is through his hands. And we start seeing people sick. Remember, he touched the mother-in-law. The mother-in-law's fever totally healed, casting out demons. What I want to encourage us of as we start looking is that through Christ, the suffering servant, he's willing to engage anybody and everybody. Why? To draw them closer to him. This is the Gospel of Mark. I'm excited. We're going to have an incredible journey in this process. So guess what? We get to do it again tomorrow with Mark 2. Thanks for listening, guys. And my prayer is that you continue to dig deep because Mark 1, there's a lot more verses to follow. Thanks.